All right, folks, welcome back. We move now to a facilitated session, and if you are kind of on the outer edges there and you'd like to come a bit more into the middle, feel free to consolidate in a little bit as an audience, because try and keep the conversation amongst a smaller group. So if you want to move, feel free to do so. I'd like to introduce Grant Johnson, Commercial Payment Solutions Manager at MasterCard. Grant in the middle, and I'll get him to introduce our two panellists. Please welcome to the stage.
Thank you. Yeah, so thanks very much, everybody, for inviting me to facilitate this panel. I think it's really interesting in terms of, sitting in a room full of CFOs and then having a discussion around commercial payment solutions and how legacy systems and technology and how we can leverage all of that to kind of streamline the world. So I thought, well, I'm not going to be able to do this on my own. I'm going to have to get a really strong panel. And fortunately, I have two very experienced people on the panel with me. To my right-hand side, I have the head of transactional banking at Westpac, who deals with CFOs day in, day out. So please help me welcome John Forrester.
Thank you.
And on the left-hand side of me is somebody that reports directly into CFO and has lots and lots of work to do for him and works very much around the banking relationships for his organization. And obviously a lot of what he's doing is changing the way his company operates. And so if you could welcome for me as well, please, Mark Anderson. So really we heard this morning all about the CFO and what's expected of a CFO. It's pretty much everything from what I heard this morning. You have to manage risk and compliance, you have to manage the financials, the return on investment calculations, the disruptive digital, all of those things. So that's really interesting. So we'll see where we go today, but what I'd really like everybody in the room to do is ask questions at any point in time. So whenever you have a question, please feel free to answer that question, because I think that's where the value is going to come. What I've really tried to do with this session is not talk to you at the high level and conceptually. What I really want to try and do is give you some takeaways. I work in conjunction with both of the people on the panel with me in various guises over the years, and there's things that you can do that will help you, and there's things that you can do that will hinder you. And I think it's really important that we pull some of those things out today. So without further ado, I'm going to ask John just to give you a couple of minutes and introduce himself and tell you what he does at the bank.
Thank you, Grant. Thank you, everybody. I've got to say, that's the first time I've ever been in a room and a CFO's clapped. That's a unique experience. Normally they throw stuff at me. Look, my responsibility is for looking after Westpac's largest transactional customers. My team includes product development, relationship teams, some business development capability, some transition implementation managers, and we essentially look after transactional customers ranging from the government to local authorities to some of the utilities, some of the folks in the room today. We're also kind of the innovation area for the corporate and commercial and institutional part of Westpac. So if there's some new stuff to look at, that often gets thrown our way as well. So it's a varied role, and it's one that kind of keeps me off the streets and keeps me out of trouble. I'm enjoying it.
Thank you. Mark.
Thanks, Grant. You were too kind when you said I reported directly to the CFO. I'm happy to say that I don't. I'm a few levels down, so probably doesn't know who I am, so it's one of the rare win-wins in life. My background is from a banking, investment management, merchant banking, and lastly in a shared service perspective. So in my focus in Fonterra is really outward focused with our banking partners. Fonterra has something like 270 bank accounts globally, 3 major banking partners and quite a few minor ones. So, and when I say we have 270 bank accounts, plus or minus, it's actually a little bit hard keeping a track of them. And largely what my role does is find solutions and solve problems. New Zealand's pretty easy from a banking perspective. It's something we all know, but a lot of the other countries aren't quite so easy. It's really around finding solutions, networking. We don't know everything, so it's just networking and leverage on our banking partners.
All right, thanks very much, gents. All right, so you don't report directly to the CFO, and that, you may think that's a good thing, but I guarantee you he finds you, and whoever reports to him will find you. So tell me, what is it that you're doing right now for your CFO, and what is he wanting you to do in the future?
I think our CFO is wanting a lot from everyone in Fonterra, and he's wanting it delivered now. He's wanting it delivered with velocity, and also for people to really take ownership. Take ownership of, it's not someone else's problem, it's my problem, and I need to solve it, those sort of things. Since the GFC in 2008 or so, we've all been hoping that working capital would go away. Well, it's not. We'll focus on working capital. So really what we're looking at doing is identifying opportunities where we can improve our working capital position, both from an AR and AP perspective. We want visibility of expenses, expense containment, as I've already talked about, opportunity identification, and that really gets pushed down. So obviously the CFO has a level has this view, and it's really making it real for all of us people. So who to some large degree actually put it in place. And it's working together as a team and taking responsibility. One of the key things that I'm keen on is around operational efficiency. Currently I work in a shared service centre, so that's all about centre of excellence, bringing tasks together, where they belong, as opposed to having pockets in 80 different countries around the world, where everyone thinks they do a great job, but actually it can be done better. Fonterra is pushing things out. Our shared service centre is in Hamilton, which I'm pretty comfortable is the centre of the universe, but we've just opened one in KL, in Kuala Lumpur, basically to service that, which is a major part of our business. It's from a time zone, a language perspective. It has been a struggle in Hamilton to get Mandarin speakers, and Korea and Thai is certainly pushing the envelope. We're also, so we're looking at that focus as, where is our business, where do we need to be? And certainly like from a banking perspective, and to a degree that's what I largely deal with, but it's also, you can't just deal with banking. It's an end-to-end process. I'm sure you get angry customers, whether they're internal or external or vendors, every now and again manage to get through to your direct line and give you a serve for this invoice or that invoice not having been paid. Generally you find it's not an AP clerk who says, oh, I'm not going to pay that today. It's actually an end-to-end, so that you've got to look at the whole end-to-end. Has the vendor been onboarded? Did they follow the process? Did we follow the process? Is the master data correct? All those types of things. So you can't just deal with things in isolation. Paying someone's probably the easy part. And as I said before, it's really leveraging off our partners. I was going to call them suppliers, but really from for the likes of John from Westpac and our other major suppliers, transactional banking providers, it is a partnership. We don't know what we don't know. We're lucky at Fonterra to the extent that we have multiple ERP systems. We've got globally 4 versions of SAP and one of JDE, and that's just the ones we know about. So actually everything is really quite hard. There's a lot of integration involved, if you're lucky, or if you're not lucky, there's not a lot of integration involved. So you have people standing in the middle making things work. And I think another important thing is actually networking amongst yourselves with people that you've met at conferences like this. Unless we're indirect competitors, it's what makes the world go round. We can all learn from each other. I have various chats with Zespri and have in the past, just around, I don't think they're a direct competitor in dairy at this stage. So, it's just those sort of things. I'll probably talk a wee bit later about, some of the tactical things that we're looking at putting in place.
Well, we see that as well. It always surprises me the level of commonality with a lot of these issues when we're talking with different customers. yes, there might be a different scale with the likes of Mark and Fonterra, but the underlying nature of the challenges is surprisingly common.
So, speaking as somebody from a technology company, right, we talk about all of these issues and all these challenges.
Is it me?
We seem to have, no, that's me.
Oh, right.
The fact that I'm not in jeans and a polo shirt doesn't mean I'm not in a technology company. But yeah, so we have a lot of this technology today in terms of transforming finance functions. And you know, I've spoken to both of you at length over some of these things. The challenge, and going back to this morning where we heard Sarah speaking, and she was talking about, you know, that the attention span of buyers is diminishing. She talked about the fact that data's critical. She talked about, you know, that really the focus now for the CFO within the board is to talk about the execution and, you know, how successful those executions are. What are some of those experiences that you're seeing in terms of taking new technology and new capability to your corporate clients, and you know, what's your experience with that?
I mean, besides my video conferencing never working when I needed to.
Well, exactly.
Have a chat to Spark about that before I go. Look, I don't think there's any rocket science to it. It's about breaking them down and looking at them in small chunks. We've got a big focus on agile. It was one of the things that Jolie talked about earlier on as well at the moment. But it's about making sure that you're applying the right methods in the right instances. We've got a piece of work on at the moment, for example, to deal with a change in the regulations to move electronic payments to cleared funds by the end of the year. It's a remarkably boring topic. If you want to talk to me about it later, I can put you to sleep with it. But there's two key elements to it for us. There's a massive technical change that we've got to put in place, but that's almost secondary to the people change that we've got to deal with. It's a big change management exercise, a big communications exercise. Many of the folks in this room will be getting some letters from us and some updates from us progressively through the year. And it's about us constantly finding a balance between delivering out the technical change required to facilitate the functional things we need to do, but also balancing those changes with our people. And that's proven to be a kind of major challenge for us. Okay. We're doing a lot in small chunks these days. Sorry, Grant. We're doing a lot in small chunks. We're trying to break things down and pilot them, and it doesn't really matter what you call them, proof of concept, pilot. We're doing some stuff with cards at the moment, for example, and we're trying to, rather than go whole hog and introduce a whole lot of risk, do them in smaller pieces and kind of prove them out and progressively build and iterate that way as well.
Yeah, kind of one of the things I was just going to say is, you know, I often do consult direct to corporate from a payments perspective, and really I would actually echo that. I mean, you really want to start small and then ramp it quickly. But be prepared to fail quickly. If it's not working, can it? Right? Because, you know, some people just keep going, keep going, keep going. And I think the art in all of this is deciding whether or not you need to put some more effort in to make it work, or actually whether you need to kill it. And I think that's the point that's hard to define, whether you actually invest a bit more and a bit more money, a bit more resource to make it work, or whether you actually just call it at that point. So I think, you know, one, start it small. Where you see success, ramp it quickly. Where you're starting to struggle, be flexible. I think that's an important thing that I've seen where certain people have a view and they say this is what they're going to do, and then they don't change that. I also think kind of the definition of kind of the issue is critical, and I deal not just in the finance function, I deal across the procurement function, I deal across the receivables, payables, you know, various functions within organisations. As an example, there was an organisation where I had the definition, or the requirements definition given to me as, we want one process for everything we buy. And that just didn't pass the sniff test. I mean, I've headed up procurement in my past, and I thought, you know, you buy a bunch of flowers, you buy a cake. That's not the same as, in this instance, buying a bridge or, you know, 20 miles of road. And only when you get back to the people that really want it happening, they say, oh, no, we've got 25 different articulated processes depending on which commodity category and so on. And so it's really important that when you're in there and you have specialists assisting you, that you're able to be flexible, because, you know, there are new things coming all the time. You know, this is where my business focuses on the technology. And more we don't make you take the technology. What we do is we'll host the technology, and all we do is link it in for you. So you don't necessarily have to buy this technology. You don't have to throw your legacy technology away. because by the time you've thrown the legacy technology away, put the new technology in, there's already new technology.
We see that a lot as well. It's about having the right methods rather than necessarily the products. There's a big focus on kind of individual products, but invariably they change and they'll evolve. And when you're talking about a 3 or 4 or 5 or 8 year horizon, there'll be any number of changes that will take place in that time in terms of the underlying tech. It's having the right methods and the right practices in place to assess them as they come along and see whether they're viable or not.
And so what's the issue you find with that? If it's as simple as that, John, why isn't that happening all the time? Are you getting involved too late in the process, or?
Look, I think there's a part of that. I think there's also partly all of the banks, I'm sure I speak for all of the banks, that not necessarily their brands are seen in some of these spaces. That's probably a challenge I'd leave you folks with. Reach out to your banks and potentially get them involved a little bit earlier to help you work through some of these challenges. You'd be surprised. We're grappling with many of the same sorts of issues. How do we digitise some of those back office processes? How do we digitise our customer experience? How do we continually do that better? Online banking for all of the banks is a massive commitment every year. All the way from, what's the customer experience like through to make sure you've got security in the background. We had one of my team were telling me the other day, she was working on some security elements to an online banking experience in her previous role. They'd built a capability to assess a card transaction in real time and then make a call on it as to whether it needed a subsequent interrogation. So if it passed the checks in the first instance, essentially it sailed through. And they built it so effectively that end-to-end transaction, assuming it didn't go to the second level, happened in kind of less than 1 second. And they thought this was fabulous, told everybody about it. But they couldn't figure out why it wasn't being used. And when they asked a few customers, they found out that customers didn't trust it because it was working so quickly. So there's a constant dynamic there to kind of balance and work with.
Yeah. Just picking up on something you said, and I'll move this one to you, Mark. You've just said it. Richard spoke from Ernst & Young this morning, and he said similar things. He said that with organisations out there and they're looking forward into their customers' needs and requirements, they're running dual tracks. So they're running their business as usual, and then they're trying to innovate next to that. One of the interesting things that he also said, though, was that it's not all front-end looking at the customer, but a lot of it is back office. Mark, in your chat earlier, you were talking about what you're doing in terms of supply chain and things like that. What are you doing in that back office side for Fonterra, and kind of how is your CFO measuring the success? What's he saying there?
A good question. I think from a supply chain finance perspective and the other things, it's really, what is the business requirement, and then how can we make the back end meet that with as few, as efficiently as possible. Obviously at Fonterra at the moment there's a huge paucity of resources in that, or a desire to have extra resources on, so we're having to work smarter on that within our shared services environment. And I probably can't comment on the CFO ROI side of things. It's really around how do we measure how efficiently we're doing, and we're doing that in a number of ways and trying to work more efficiently. One is resource planning. So basically, really getting to understand what our inputs are, what work's coming in, what resources we've got to meet that, and also what backlog we've got, and then doing something about that. As normally we just do those things and put them aside and say that's very interesting, we're screwed. But actually trying to get people on board, seeing the backlogs coming, those sorts of things. So that's probably one of the major things. We're also in a number of shared service groups around benchmarking, how well we're doing. Our shared service is probably a little bit lucky at the moment in the fact that we're having a lot of work pushed our way, so we're lucky and unlucky. But so it's really around the benchmarking and the resource planning type of things.
Yeah. So I'll come back to you in a little while, and I'll leave you this question, and kind of, does the CFO actually understand what you're doing in terms of innovation and digital. So don't answer that just yet. And I'll come to you on that question, John. So, you know, Richard spoke this morning and he said they did a survey in Australia in the AFR. 3% of CFOs had a digital background, right? So if that's the case, if that's the reality, and I don't know whether it is for New Zealand, you can comment on that. Yeah, we're a bit slow in Australia potentially. So what's the need? Is it an educational need? Is it an execution need? Is it both?
No, I think it's a bit of both. I think that, again, it can be the responsibility of your banking partners. Get them along and help you work through some of these problems. Constant challenge to my team is to improve the way we explain some of these things. I think we make a lot of these challenges much more complicated than they need to be, or at least we communicate them in a way that's much more complicated than it needs to be. I think the constant challenge that we've got to look ourselves in the mirror is say, well, how do we explain these things much more simply, and how do we help our customers work through these things in a much more simple way? On the execution side, as I said before, again, I think we overcomplicate it a lot. Break it down into small chunks and work through them in a diligent and kind of disciplined way.
So give us an example of where something's worked really well for you, and another example of where it kind of hasn't. Just as an example to kind of take people through a bit of a journey to say, well, kind of, you know, this customer did this and that happened, and this one did that, and didn't go quite as well.
So depending on which sort of project you look at, but if we have a customer that's moving from one bank to another, it's usually incumbent on the bank that customer's moving to manage that transition. And these can be substantial projects. You can probably imagine that a large organisation moving one bank to another presents a kind of multitude of risks and potential costs and complexities. So, but all the banks have got really quite good at doing that, because if we're not, frankly, very few of you out there are probably ever going to have any proclivity to change banks. So they've got very structured and methodical in the way they go about that, Grant. And I think that, you know, that would be a good example of one that is working quite well. I think some of the learnings from that is like, risk of telling the obvious, have a very clear scope and manage tightly to that scope. My teams, and I'm sure again I speak for all the banks, all of the teams kind of are constantly looking for other opportunities or room for improvement for all of you folks during that process, and invariably there are opportunities that get presented, but it's a case of making sure that we assess those opportunities very, very quickly to make sure that we're not introducing unnecessary risk or time or cost to the overall transition. Most of the time the customers dealing with want to get that transition over as quickly as possible so they can get stable on their new platform and their new banking partnership and then move forward. So you need a kind of a durable and quite a rigorous process to assess those opportunities as they come up. Put them into the scope if you're choosing to take that on, or set it aside and set up a subsequent process to look after it.
Okay. Yeah, look, it makes sense. Let me then put a scenario to you. Happened not last year, the year before, so about 18 months ago now. I went in to see an organisation. I went to see the head of payables. I was having a conversation with them. They're really looking about a quicker, better, faster way to pay things, possibly expand their DPO a little bit. They were starting to look at those things. Anyway, I started digging and really realised that kind of they had some issues within their supply charts. They were managing great numbers of suppliers. They wanted to reduce some of the numbers of suppliers in their systems. They were thinking that cards might help them do that. At the end of the day, yes, it's cards, but to be honest with you now, in commercial payments, probably less than 20% of the volume we see is actually on cards. The other 80% of the volume sits on electronic accounts payable type systems. So there might well be a 16-digit number in the ether somewhere, but it's not a card. It's an electronic system. It comes with workflow. It comes with controls and visibility and data and all those other good things. But once we started to have that discussion, as you say, the scope started to move. And it was very difficult for this person that was head of payables to actually go back and say, look, I want to stop the project because I want to change the scope, because I didn't realise these things were available. Now, it wasn't your bank, but I was there in conjunction with another bank, and they hadn't been told various of these aspects by their banker. Now, so I think, you know, part of the role for MasterCard is we educate the bankers, and obviously part of what I'm doing here this week is working with some of, certainly your bank, to upskill the sales staff in terms of what capability actually exists and how it can be deployed. And then when they see the opportunity, they take me out there with them. So all of that story really is just so that I could ask this question is, how much is, and Mark, will come to you first, how much do you partner with external parties to help you deliver on terms of what you're trying to do, and how do you manage that process?
Glad you went to Mark first.
What's that, sorry?
I'm glad he went to you first.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I suppose as much as required. You know, have we got the expertise in-house? You know, and sometimes do we think we have the expertise in-house, but it really depends. It depends on whether we think that's a core capability for us, obviously, and whether we, and how much IP we need to buy versus how much IP we can expect our partners to provide. So yeah, over to you, John.
Yeah, thank you, mate. Yeah, look, we do it selectively. We get quite anxious when there's kind of somebody sits between us and our customer relationship. The banks are all very protective of that relationship with their customers. We certainly don't take it for granted. So if there's a risk around someone disintermediating that makes us kind of tense. Having said that, if there is capability that we can't deploy, or it's usually a resourcing challenge as much as anything else, we've the risk of boring our audience, the regulatory environment in banking is fairly challenging at the moment, and we're consuming a fair bit of our resources just to stay out of that game.
Yeah.
So doing stuff for customers, we've had to be a bit more creative about than possibly we had in the past.
Yeah. And look, and the reason I ask that question is because clearly I'm not front and centre with any direct corporates. There's not a service that I can bring to anybody in the room and say, here's a MasterCard service that I can give you. If anybody in the room wants a MasterCard service, they've got to come through a bank, right? And that's obviously what we do. And why I've raised this is a number of people have said to me, so why is MasterCard here? I'm saying, well, it's really just to lift the level of exposure in terms of what we do so that you can go to your banks and ask for it. That's really, so I'm really looking in that educational space. I'm not looking in the executional space unless I'm in supporting a bank or in supporting an organisation.
Yeah, and I think we look to you guys for that global kind of perspective as well. You a big part of what you provide to us is a view on what's happening in the rest of the world that we don't necessarily have a view on as direct.
Yeah.
Sorry, Mark.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and probably one of the decision makers for us is to how we connect with our banks and other providers is really, we want to be as bank agnostic as possible, i.e. we don't want to be hooked totally in with the IP of one bank to the extent that we can't change. Not that we want to change banks all the time because it is quite disruptive and quite a lot of work, but we have made a decision. Certainly I've made a decision to try and use bank agnostic products, even though that in some cases they may be slightly more expensive. And sometimes, you know, and that would be the likes of SWIFT, which we utilise, which is a worldwide funds transfer network. So we're Fonterra is a member of SWIFT, and we hook up with a couple of banks on that. We need to extend that out further. Probably another one is the supply chain finance product that we're just in the process of implementing at the moment, where we could use there's a number of banks that have portals to do that, but we chose a third party so that we're not tied with one bank. The funding can be done by a number of banks and those types of things. So it's not about we want to suddenly drop this bank and jump across to that bank, but we want to leave our options open. So it's sort of like a open platform type stuff. So certainly bank agnostic. Jumping back a few minutes, I think Grant was talking about solutions, and one thing that was very, very apparent to me, there's no silver bullet, there's no one solution, and it's becoming more and more segmented. You can't just say, oh, we've got supply chain financing, one size fits all, because it doesn't. So it's really, unfortunately, it's very seldom do we say, oh, well, we'll drop this and we'll put in place that. It's this and that, those types of things.
Okay. Folks, any questions from the audience while we get to this stage here? I have a whole host of questions that I can keep asking, but just from what you've heard so far, anybody have any questions they'd like to ask? Oh, there's a couple here, so one at the back.
Grant, you talked about being here to sort of educate people about what sort of product, if you like, is out there, what should the CFO be expecting their bank to come to them with in the transaction banking market these days?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's a number of things. I mean, you know, you hear all sorts of jargon, and I think the first thing I'm trying to do is take the jargon out of this whole conversation, right? You know, you hit ghost cards, virtual cards, lodge cards, prepaid cards, credit cards, debit cards. You hear it all, right? At the end of the day, all of that's interesting to somebody like me, but not really to anybody else, right? At the end of the day, you have a 16-digit number that's used for payment, for control, for process refinement. So you know, what are we solving for? What is it you're trying to solve? Because ultimately then that will determine, as we come back, which product, i.e., how do you fund it? Do you pre-fund it? Do you fund it directly at the point of transaction? Do you fund it post-transaction? What kind of form factor is it going to have? You know, does it become a physical piece of plastic because somebody has to hand it over to a cab driver? Or does it end up in a phone because there's enough contactless acceptance in the market they're in? Or does it end up in the ether on a system whereby somebody types an email request, effectively gets routed to wherever it does, they input a whole lot of mandated data, and then somebody approves that, and it creates a one-time use product defined by the authorizer in terms of which markets it can be used in, when the supplier who receives that payment instruction can actually present for payment, i.e. if it's 60-day terms, you create this one-time use 16-digit number that can only be presented in 60 days' time, thereby ensuring that one, finance gives the payment instruction to the supplier, but two, you're also actually keeping to the KPIs of the contract written by your procurement person. So there's all these multiple goals that you can put together in a system. Now, we have a system like that. I'm sure our competitors have similar systems. But I don't think a lot of people understand at that level down just how those systems can work. Talk to your bankers. They're there. These systems exist. So I think that's the role that I have, is very much an educational role in terms of, one, what the products are, but two, what they can solve for. We've got a large insurance company in New Zealand where we've turned their entire processing system upside down, where in the past the driver of the vehicle used to have to get all the paperwork together and give it to the insurance company, who then recaptured it all and then decided that the driver could then take their vehicle for repairs to a certain place. Now what happens is the driver goes to whichever repair place they want to go to, the repair person puts all the detail in, sends it off to the approver approves it, and provides the 16-digit number to the supplier. Very simple. Everybody wins. The supplier gets his money earlier, the insurance company loses a whole lot of process that they don't want, and the driver gets his satisfaction at one point instead of having to go through two different points. So everybody wins, but only because we understood what issue we were trying to solve for. So that's the thing for me. There was a question down the front here that I think...
I'd endorse that approach. The challenge I put out to my team is to go out and talk with you folks, look at your processes and then bring that back. It's not about dropping products on your lap, it's about understanding where those opportunities exist, and then we can build stuff around that.
I had a question just around leveraging technology, I guess, relating to banks. I was interested in your comment about having a direct relationship with Swift and that sort of thing. So would you utilise an independent application technology for looking after payments, your cash flow and treasury, or would you be more having a direct relationship with the bank and getting them to provide that information to you?
We have feeds from banks, which tend to be bank statements and balances, but we use a combination of, we have treasury management systems, which are obviously used by our treasury system, as well as ERPs, and we have some bespoke systems as well for cash flow management. I think like everyone in the world, we could do better. We're hoping to utilise some of our ERPs and get rid of the bespoke systems. And from our shared services perspective, we are just looking at paying bills, But, so our time frame for cash flow management is, a couple of days. Have we got enough money now? And to give Treasury enough visibility to manage the longer term. So yeah, we use a number of things. Swift is just a pipeline, but it is a pipeline to all banks. And one of the beauties about Swift is it also brings along which doesn't need to, but it brings along some standards around payments. So what they call ISO 20022, and so it's a standard way of talking globally. So theoretically, all major banks you could talk with, as opposed to having bespoke New Zealand formats versus Citibank versus Westpac versus Australia versus whoever. It's a single way of communicating. Having said that, it's not a silver bullet. It's a bit like SAP. It's a big box that rattles, and you get to put it together.
It's an interesting challenge, that one, isn't it? It'll be interesting for the banks to see what business online banking looks like for customers over the next few years. I think that there's a move away from those intermediaries. So we're seeing, files coming direct from the likes of Xero or direct from the likes of ERP and going straight into our processing systems. That intermediate step where you import it into an online banking platform and approve it and release it again, that is arguably the demand for that's going to dissipate.
Yeah, certainly. We're keen on host-to-host communications with our banks. All approvals should theoretically be done in the ERP. So if we put them into our electronic banking system, either via file upload, we're not approving, we're releasing. So it's just some people love that sort of thing. I just think it's a waste of time. All the DAs and that should all be in the ERP. I see we're running out of time there, Grant. Probably one challenge I'd put out to everyone is, as I see these groups and corporates in the whole as a bit of a ginger group to actually drive our providers to do better. So we provide some fairly robust feedback to our banking partners around what we think they should be able to do better, around banking systems and whatever, or where they're not living up to it. And to others, I was having a conversation with, about a couple of conversations with them. I failed miserably, I might add, and they were actually a supplier of POS machines, and that's what they hired those out and sold them. So I said, that's great. You want to become a vendor? Well, we don't want you as a vendor. Can you take a card payment? No. You sell POS machines and you can't take card payments. So it looks like I certainly see there's a role there for us to get people to lift their game. But having said that, we also need to lift our games. It's a two-way street.
Yeah. Look, as always with the panel discussion, you only get into the really interesting stuff right about as the panel ends. This is no different. If there's one last question, if Andrew will permit me to take one more, because there were a couple of hands went up earlier. Otherwise, so is there one more question? Somebody had their hand out up here earlier. No? All right, on that note then, please help me thank the panel members. Thank you.
Thank you.